Hello, it's a great day here at the studio and we're getting started with our project Blue Star. This is a strip piecing quilt top that should come together very quickly and have a very lovely design, I believe. This is a 2-color quilt and we're going to get started on it right now. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi, and let's get started on this new quilt top. We talked a little bit in previous videos about what the quilt top is going to look like, and here is a little sketch that I drew up. And this is a combination of 2 blocks. We're going to have a busy block, which in this case is the Sister's Choice. That's a traditional title block, and we're going to have something I'm calling a plain block, which is the part of this quilt top that is my own personal design. Now, it's nothing special, it's just that I decided to do something a little different from the inspiration piece, and that's what I came up with. So let me show you those 2 blocks. What I did, and I don't know if this is helpful to you, but this is helpful to me, is to take, especially in a quilt where you're doing blocks that are going to repeat themselves over and over and over, to have a reminder when you're putting your strips together, when you're sewing your strips together, so that you know exactly what you're supposed to do, because nothing is more frustrating than sewing it on the wrong way and then having to rip it out. So having that visual reminder all the time is good for me, and it might be good for you as well. Excuse me. So first I started with the Sister's Choice block. And I just drew this up on a sheet of poster board. You could use a piece of paper that you kept near your sewing machine or your cutting board or even your ironing board, however it works best for you. But I drew all of the blocks. There are 25 blocks in this one Sister's Choice block. And I think that probably at some point this block was constructed by sewing 25 separate blocks together. Our goal with this strip piecing quilt is to make it quicker and easier for you, and therefore it will make it just a little bit faster to get together. So I drew the 25 blocks by creating a grid, and then I used my inspiration piece to make sure that I colored them in to show how we're going to use it in our blocks. Now, if you were doing another kind of block, let's say you were making a kind of scrappy quilt where you wanted this block to always be a certain color, or you wanted the points in the corners to be a certain color, you could color that as well so that when you're putting these pieces together, it would be helpful for you. And I have used this technique before in an applique quilt where I drew out the pattern, and the blocks on that pattern were very large. And what I did was I drew out the pattern. There were a lot of circles and leaves on that. And everything had to be put in a certain space, and then all of the blocks came together to make the quilt. And in that case, it was very helpful because I had my pattern all drawn out and colored in on the appropriate colors. So once I got all the pieces together, I laid the background fabric down and then placed the pieces right where they should go and pin them in place. And by doing that, all of my blocks came out consistent. Everything was in the right place and it was lined up with each other as perfect as we as humans can do. Okay, so back to this project. This is the Sister's Choice block. I'm going to be referring to this as the busy block because it has lots of pieces. And then alternating with that block is what I'm going to call the plain block. And on this one, it's very simple. It's all white with that one little blue square in the middle. This one is going to be super easy to put together. If you're looking to build your confidence, start with this one. This one is going to have one blue 3-inch strip, one white 3-inch strip, and then it's going to have one I think it's 5.5 inch strip. We'll double check that as we cut, but those are going to be the cutting dimensions. So you're looking at cutting 3 strips to make this one block. And I did one yesterday and it came together super, super fast. Okay, and then the other technique I'm going to use in presenting this to you on this block in particular is we're going to go strip by strip. So the first strip we're going to work on is the center strip. Very simple. And then from there, we're going to move on to this strip. And then from there, we're going to move on to the outside strip. Now what you'll notice, I'm not sure if we can get this, is this strip and this strip are exactly the same. They're just flipped around. And the one next to it is the same as the one on the other side. I'm not going to be able to do that, but it's just stripped, it's just flipped around as well. So we're looking at a lot of things that repeat themselves, and that too will lead to this quilt top coming together quickly. Now let's talk about a little bit of practicality. One of the things that makes this work really well is consistency. And that means consistency in your cutting and your sewing. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that your strips need to be 3 inches on one side and 3 inches on the other side and 3 inches in the middle. And when you sew your seams, they need to be 1/4 inch all the way down it. So we've got to figure out a way to make that happen. One of the things I encourage is that you use one ruler for the whole project. Now that's not to say you can't use another ruler for certain things, but let this be your primary ruler. And if you ever have a question about your measurements, go back to this one. Now I have noticed when I was working at this and kind of testing it out a little bit yesterday, that I have these two and I paired them up and I have found that the markings on them are exactly the same as far as the measurements. So we probably could use those interchangeably from time to time when we have a space constraint. Now the other thing I'm going to talk about right now is being able to cut your fabric consistently. You want to make sure that your edges line up, and that may mean that the one at the bottom is hiding a bit, or that the one at the top is a little too showy. So we want to make sure we line those up as closely as possible to get them straight. Okay, so now they're lined up. And then we're going to cut these strips. These are going to be 3-inch strips. So we're going to put our fabric right there on the 3-inch mark, and right over here on the 3-inch mark, we're going to hold it in place across the ruler, and then we're going to use a nice sharp rotary blade to cut. Little bit of pressure, not a lot. I find if I use a lot of pressure, I tend to go away from the ruler and my cut is not straight. Yeah. Okay, so there's our cut. We got a little piece that's hanging on. So it's 3 inches on one side. We can double check it. It's 3 inches on the other side. If I can line it up. I'll show you this just so it's really super clear. It is on the money. That's going to be important when you're sewing, because you're going to put these strips up next to each other and you're going to sew a seam, and you want that seam to be consistent at 1/4 inch. I have found that my machine has a 1/4 inch foot, and in this case it is one that goes on. It has a little guide bar here on the side, and that guide bar holds the fabric going in right up against it to hold it in place. So all you've got to do is just guide that along. I also find that when I'm sewing strips, I might put a pin at the beginning or in the middle somewhere away from the stitch line. I don't put the pins at the stitch line when I'm sewing strips because that pin will grab against whatever foot you're working with and it will pull your fabric and your seam will not be straight. So that's why I don't use any pins in the seam line. But when you're lining these up, for most of these, oops, I got two. For most of these, you're going to be lining up a blue strip and a white strip. And you're going to want to line them up so that they are right there at the same place. They're lined up. And then we're going to put them in the machine and do the seam. Now, I'm using on my machine a straight stitch with a single needle plate, and the length of the stitch I've chosen is 2.6. And I have a little piece of chalkboard tape on my machine, and when I'm working in a project and I want it all to be the same, I use that little chalk marker to mark down exactly what my settings are, what my needle setting is, what my stitch width is, if that's appropriate, and what my stitch length is. And then I mark the project next to it so that when I turn it on, because mine doesn't save from session to session, I can make sure I've got it set properly. And with this machine, I have chosen, it is an 06S, a control for the needle position, and that will put that right at 1/4 inch. So we should never have a seam that has a larger than 1/4 inch width. Okay, so we talked about how to cut and be accurate on our cuts. We've talked about how to sew and be accurate on our sewing. So what I've decided to do, and usually this is what I do on my quilts, is I usually do one of each block to make sure that it's something that is going to look like I expect it when it's finished. And frankly, it's something that I enjoy. If it is a quilt block that has a lot of fiddly pieces that are going to do nothing but annoy me, then I know it's a lovely block, but I'm not going any further. Or I can choose to make a smaller size. So, with that said, I want to show you some of the things that I've done to get started. And we will go from there. The first thing I did was I made, and that's not it, the center, whoops, the center piece to our busy block. And I'll just remind you that what I need is I need some clips, and that will hold it in place so I don't have to hold it and you can see it. So let's clip this. Okay, we're going to work on this strip. It's 3 blues and 1 white. We cut 3-inch strips from our fabric and we sewed them together on the machine with 1/4 inch seams. And then each piece was pressed with the fabric going to the blue. So that's what this is. It's the whole width of the fabric. I think in just doing some rough calculations about how many busy blocks we have, that one piece constructed like this will do all of our blocks unless we run into a problem or I've miscalculated. So once you do this, you're finished with this one. This is a really quick place to start. Then the next thing I did was I started working on this strip. Now this strip is a blue square, a white square, a blue square, and then 2 half square triangles. Let's disregard the half square triangles and just work on these 3 strips. It's the same thing as this, just not quite as many. So we're going to have 2 blues and 1 white. Same thing, 1/4 inch seams, press it to the dark side. And you might ask what that is. So let's see. Here you can see, and let me check this, that it's been pressed with the white being folded over on top of the blue. And what that does is it keeps us from seeing the fabric under the white fabric. I don't know if you're going to be able to tell this, but if we do it this way, you can begin to see that blue fabric coming up. And this is just a neater look. Where that really comes into play is when we're working on the plain block. Because on the plain block, we have just 1 blue square in the middle, the sea of white. And if you'll notice here, you don't see any blue anywhere except there. And that's because they're pressed so that all of the seams go into the middle. And then these 2 long seams have just been opened up, just to keep it a little flatter, a little simpler. And we'll get to that one in just a minute. Okay, so we've made the strips. Those are the easiest parts to put this together. And it's a great place for us to stop today to think about what we need to do. And what I've done, I have not calculated how many strips we need as total, but I did calculate how many strips I needed to get 1 block of each. And that's going to make a lot more than we are doing right now. Or should I say, it's going to make, we're going to cut a lot more strips than what I specifically need for the 1 block, because it's faster and easier to do the whole thing as opposed to just making 1. That's our goal, right? Simplifying quilting. And if you need something fast, or if you just need that encouragement of getting something accomplished in a short period of time, this is going to be helpful. So here's what I started out with. I started out with, for the busy block, 6 3-inch blue strips. I have 5 3-inch white strips. And then I cut 1 7-inch blue strip and 1 7-inch white strip. Let me write that down, because if I don't, I'll forget. Now, the 7-inch strips, what are they? Remember, we're talking about the busy block. In the busy block, we need to make, for each block, 8 half square triangles. And at this point, let me give you a good measurement. These are 3, I've got them at about 3 1/4 inches. I think they're a little small. But that's one of the advantages of doing 1 block. We can make enough for 1 block, see how it fits, and if it needs to be adjusted, we can adjust it. It may be that the pressing is not pulled enough to open that seam up in the pressing, or it could be that our seam allowance is just slightly off. So that 7-inch strip is going to be used to make these. And in our next video, I'm going to go over a most efficient way to make those half square triangles. But for now, I want to leave you with the idea of these 2 blocks coming together to make our quilt, and a couple of the really fast ways that you can make your foundation strips to put this together. Again, we had the strip for the middle of the busy strip. It's 3 blue strips, 2 white strips sewn together with a 1/4 inch seam, and all of the fabric pressed to the blue. So on this, the white strips have been pressed out to the blue, and you don't see the shadow underneath. And then we also talked about making the next set of strips where you have two blues and one white sewn together and constructed the same way, with the white fabric being folded over into the blue. And I can tell you, we were talking about these not being quite big enough. I can tell you, in just looking at this, when I pressed it, I probably did not open that seam out just quite enough. But we can always go back and adjust that. So I'd like to leave you at this point today. If you have any questions about sewing these seams, it's pretty simple. If you've ever used a machine before, you're just going to put it in with a medium stitch length and stitch them. The only thing I will tell you is that fabric to fabric may not be exactly the same width. So you want to start on one end of your fabric where everything matches up, and it may be that on the other end of the fabric it doesn't match up. See, this white one is a little bit longer than the blue. Just make sure that your not matching up end is on the same edge and your matching up end is on the other end. And you'll also have to sew this way and then flip it around for the next seam to sew in from the other way. If it's a little bit off as far as the length of the strips, don't sweat that, because you can just trim it off as you need to. You just don't want to have a set of strips where all but one are leveled up and that one kind of cuts back a couple of inches, and then on the other side have the same thing, so that you're missing the strips. What'll happen at the end, especially if you've bought fabric really close to the requirements on this pattern or any other pattern, will be that you will have to pick those seams apart and re-sew them to be able to get the number of pieces that you need, or you'll have to do that part of it over again if you have extra fabric. Those are my words of wisdom for you. Now, the next time we come together, we're going to be talking about these half square triangles, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the plain block, because we can put that plain block together in one video and you can see how quickly that comes together. This one requires a little more cutting and sewing, so I want to give you a little bit more time to work on that, and we will gather next time to work on the plain block. If you've enjoyed this video, it's been helpful to you at all, please be sure to like it and subscribe to our channel. And we look forward to seeing you as we continue working on this quilt project, Blue Star. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.